Now, in this video, I mainly want to talk about the year ahead for Star Wars, about how I believe this really will be a make it or break it year for the franchise, as we have 4 major releases to look forward to, or dread depending on your point of view, I suppose. And those 4, not including the opening of Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland and Disney World, are Episode 9, The Mandalorian live-action show, Season 7 of the Clone Wars animated series, and the release of the game Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. And yeah, there are certainly other Star Wars related releases this year, but those are the 4 big ones that are likely going to garner the most attention and will cause the biggest splash within the fandom, for good or ill. And quite honestly, these are 4 chances for Disney and Lucasfilm, and EA of course, to hit home runs, strike out, or do something in between those 2 extremes. 4 chances to start to change the hearts and minds of the group of fans who have been, shall we say, less than impressed by the first 6+ years of Disney Star Wars. But here's the thing, all 4 of those projects are set to be released in the back half of 2019, which means Disney and Lucasfilm have a lot of time to fill with marketing for those projects and general fan relations, the latter of which most would agree have been handled rather poorly lately. And their first and best chance to do both, to really start to turn the tide of the fandom, will be at Star Wars Celebration this coming April. And what I'd really love to see the underlying theme of Celebration be this year is them trying to truly convey the message that going forward with this franchise, it's going to be all about the fans, that they want to try and have a better relationship with us. And yeah, I know they're going to say that one way or another. I mean, they're always saying things like that, especially at Celebration. But I'd really love to hear someone in an official capacity with Disney and Lucasfilm acknowledge that, it's okay if you didn't like The Last Jedi, that they understand it wasn't a hit with all fans, that they understand the concerns some may have with Rey, and it has nothing to do with her gender. That they get why some were upset about the way Luke was treated, or that they can see why some think the movie didn't mesh well with the rest of the canon. And the sad part is, if they'd just done something like that from the start, I don't know that the backlash would have been anywhere near as bad as it was. Sure, it wouldn't have changed people's minds about the movie, but a lot of the time, people just want to know that they're being heard, that their concerns are at least being addressed or taken under consideration. Sometimes all you have to do to calm someone down is to tell them that you understand why they're upset. And though they don't have to come out and say just that, Celebration will be a good chance for them to kind of tell us that we heard you and understand. And if they do that and can convince us that they're being genuine with that sentiment, I think this event can really start to generate a lot of excitement for everything that will be released in the later half of the year. And no, I'm certainly not saying fans should forgive and forget everything, and I certainly know a lot of fans have already declared Star Wars is dead to them, or won't give it a chance as long as Kathleen Kennedy is at the helm. But I do think the fans that have walked away want to come back. I think they want to love Star Wars. I think that's pretty obvious, actually. And most of them probably really don't care how that happens, just that it does happen. Most would probably accept that Kathleen Kennedy is president for the next couple of years, as long as the products they started to churn out were quality Star Wars again, free of any hints of any possible agenda beyond just making great movies, shows, games, and whatever else. I mean, this really isn't that complicated when you think about it. Make Star Wars only about Star Wars, and most fans will likely enjoy it, or at the very least appreciate the fact that you're trying. But as I've said before, Kathleen Kennedy doesn't give off the impression of being a truly passionate Star Wars fan. And the question then is, do you really need to be one to run Lucasfilm successfully? And, well, no, you don't necessarily need to, but if you're not, you better be willing to bring in and defer to people who are passionate about the franchise when making decisions about its future. And for me, someone who's enjoyed most of what Disney has done with Star Wars, outside of The Last Jedi, the main problems I've had are the disrespectful way the naysayers of The Last Jedi have been treated, as well as the very evident lack of any sort of game plan, not just for the sequel trilogy, but for the franchise on the whole. It just feels like they've been winging the whole thing as they go, figuring that fans would just eat up anything with the name Star Wars on it. It's the feeling of being taken for granted, that I and other lifelong Star Wars fans would automatically love and fork over our money for just any old thing Star Wars, that has hurt the most, and what I feel is at the root of the problem with the franchise right now. So how do they fix that? Well, they have 4 chances at the end of this year to do it, to make us feel like we're not being taken for granted anymore. And for many, I'd say they're about the last 4 chances they're likely going to give Disney and Lucasfilm. And let's start by examining the first one, the one most likely to be a home run since it's just sitting on a tee waiting to be knocked out of the park. And that is, of course, Season 7 of the Clone Wars. Now, I almost don't think they can get this one wrong, as long as it's essentially the old band getting back together, led by Dave Filoni, and minus George Lucas, of course, trying to give fans a satisfying end to a much beloved series. And I don't know if it's going to be them finishing up the partially completed episodes they had when the show was canceled, or if there will be all new and original episodes, or if it's going to be a combination of both. But as long as Filoni and company are allowed to just do their thing, this is likely going to be a huge win for them. Then we move on to The Mandalorian, which I think is also likely to be a win for them. Most fans love Mandalorians, and this show is being brought to us by Jon Favreau, who actually played one of the best Mandalorians ever in my opinion, that being Pre Vizsla in the Clone Wars. He also directed the first Iron Man movie, which took a character that was almost completely unknown, outside of the comic book fandom anyway, and turned him into a household name. Though, yes, Robert Downey Jr. certainly deserves a lot of the credit for that as well. Then when you factor in Dave Filoni is writing and directing the first episode, the fact that this is likely going to be a bit more adult-oriented than anything we've gotten out of Star Wars before, and that Star Wars, as proven by the Clone Wars and Rebels, is well suited for the series format, I do think this has a lot of potential to be good and another positive for Disney and Lucasfilm this year. But then we move on to the two big question marks, which are also the two most likely to make the biggest waves one way or the other. And let's start with the game being brought to us by EA and Respawn Entertainment called Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. And here's the problem right away. Even if you're not a huge fan of video games, you've probably heard the company EA talked about, and not in a good way. As of late, there has been a bit of an uprising against some of the biggest companies in the video game industry by the fans, and EA has been one of the main targets. The Star Wars gaming community, as well as the general gaming community, really took aim at EA a little over a year ago because of the pay-to-win loot box system they wanted to implement in the game Battlefront 2, a system that got removed at last minute thanks to overwhelming backlash. But this was hardly the first mistake EA has made in terms of their handling of the Star Wars license. The first Battlefront game, or should I say the first of the new generation of Battlefront games, launched in November of 2015, and the main complaint was the game felt lacking, light on content, or just incomplete or unfinished in general. And if you wanted more content, you had to pay for it, either by getting a season pass or by paying for the DLCs as they came out. And setting aside EA's abysmal reputation for a moment, the concept behind the game itself, that a Padawan survived Order 66 and went on the run afterwards, isn't exactly the freshest or most original idea ever. I mean, just in terms of the story, it'll be hard to rival the one of Kanan Jarrus shown to us in Rebels, who was also a Padawan who survived Order 66 and went on the run, only to eventually rejoin the fight and die heroically. Then there's also the question of, will this game offer anything new in terms of innovation, and will it be fun to play, or will they just try and use the Star Wars name to sell it, thus taking advantage of fans again? Now mind you, I'm not a huge video game fan. I was when I was younger, but not as much anymore, and one of the reasons is so many games that I play tend to feel like the same thing to me. I feel like the video game industry has stagnated and fallen into a rut of reskinning and slightly tweaking the same type of game over and over again. And my greatest fear for Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is that it'll look like Star Wars, but it'll feel like a game I've already played before. And last, but hopefully not least, we have Episode 9, and this is of course the one that will most likely make it or break it for people, and the franchise itself maybe. Games and shows are one thing, but if fans aren't loving the movies, then we have a problem, and likely so will Disney and Lucasfilm when you consider how lucrative a successful movie can be. And I really don't want to talk about what I think this movie should be, as much as I'd like to express how important the success of this movie is in terms of the future of the franchise. This is Disney and Lucasfilm's last chance to make a good impression with the heart and soul of the Star Wars franchise, before moving on to totally new and different things. This is the last movie most people, from average moviegoers to casual fans to the hardcore fans, will almost feel obligated to see since it's the end of the Skywalker saga. This is the last time people will just feel like this is something they have to do, and as Solo proved, they're not going to go and see just anything called Star Wars. So the last thing Episode 9 needs to do is to leave a bad taste in people's mouths, or to send this franchise into the truly unknown on the wrong foot. Or worse yet, by totally botching this new end of the Skywalker saga, because as I've said in other videos, the greatest challenge for the sequel trilogy is having to justify its own existence. We once had a near-perfect ending to this story, and by them continuing it, they're implying many things, like that they needed to continue the story, that something was left untold, and that this new ending would bring an even more final conclusion. And one of the reasons why Rey has been rejected by some is it's hard to see why and how a nobody from Jakku will play such an important part in the ending of the Skywalker saga. How she will end this in a way that is better or more satisfying than seeing Anakin Skywalker return to the light to save his son and destroy his master who once turned him to the dark side. And to be clear, I'm not saying the story of Rey and Kylo Ren is necessarily a bad one, or that it can't end well. But this isn't their story alone, not even close, and if Episode 9 focuses entirely on them and neglects the bigger picture, then I can guarantee it will fail to resonate with a lot of fans. However, if it can give Rey and Kylo a satisfying end and wrap up the Skywalker saga in a way that justifies undoing the ending of Return of the Jedi and continuing that story, or if it somehow undoes the ending of Return of the Jedi, which is a very tall task, then this movie could go a long, long way in repairing the damage within the fanbase, especially if the other 3 big releases this year are also successes. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Can the big releases this year turn this franchise around for those who have been unhappy, or will this be the nail in the coffin? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.